Hola amores, what is up guys? It is your girl Christina. Welcome back to my channel. And it's been a while since y'all have seen me with my hair straightened, and I feel like you can really see my grays. So if you see them popping through, guys, just ignore them, okay? Let's just pretend they're not there, okay? All right, so today's video. So last night, right, I was scrolling through my Instagram as I usually do, and I came across this post saying Fat Joe said Latinos are black. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh Lord, here goes again. And I knew the comment section of that post was going to be on and popping. So before I start with the rest of the video, here is a quick clip from that interview Fat Joe gave where he made this statement.
All the music is African. Brazilian music,
all of it.
Dominican music, Spanish drums. All the music is African music. So, you know, you getting on the Afro beat now. I've been in Africa. They've been doing that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? It ain't new. All the music is African. You know what I'm saying? But you right. Like, you know what I'm saying? Even in Puerto Rico, when you go to Caribbean, like let's speak about Latinos not being black. Latinos are black. Mm-hmm. In Cuba at one time, there was 8 million Cubans. 5 million, unfortunately, were slaves. 3 million were actual Cubans. And they integrated and had babies. Same thing with Puerto Rico when you go to Loíza. And when you talk about Santeria, that came from the motherland, Africa. You know, sometimes Latinos might even identify themselves with African and black culture more than black people. Mm-hmm. This ain't no crazy thing. Fat Joe ain't on crack. He know what he talking about.
So before I even looked through the comments, I already knew what was going to be in there. I already knew, and this is no offense to anyone listening, but I already knew on the one hand, it was going to be some black people either saying like or it was going to be black people saying, oh, and now y'all want to be black. Now that it's trendy, you guys only want to be black when it's convenient. You guys only want to pass to say the N-word. I knew somebody was going to bring up Dominicans because you cannot have a conversation about Latinos and blackness without somebody throwing us in there, because, you know, at the end of the day, all of us Dominicans are some self-hating Negropeans that don't want to accept our African roots, all right? And then on the other hand, I knew there was going to be the non-Caribbean Latinos talking about, we're not black. You can leave that for the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans and the Cubans, but I'm not black, I'm Mexican. Or it was going to be some of the Caribbean Latinos saying, oh, we're not black, we're mixed. Whatever. And of course, the shade room never disappoints. So here are some of the comments that people left under that post. So as y'all could see, a lot of the comments were pretty much in line with what I was expecting to see anytime the conversation of, you know, blackness, African ancestry, and Latinos/Hispanics comes up. But of course, you know, even though a lot of people in the shade room comments like to be trolling, there were some people that, you know, gave some, you know, more educated responses and helped to clarify, you know, what's really going on when it comes to us. There are some of us that are black, there are some of us that are not. And here are some of those comments. Now, let us dig into and analyze what Fat Joe said, shall we? So, the first statement he made, and I'm just going to focus on the little short clip that I presented in the video. He said Brazilian music, Dominican music, Spanish drums, that's all African. Now, Fat Joe was correct to an extent. When you look at music from the Caribbean islands specifically, and then of course Brazil, there is undoubtedly a very evident African influence within our cultures, our music, and our dance. That being because of the fact that the majority of the enslaved Africans that were transported to this side of the world during the transatlantic slave trade were taken to the Caribbean and Brazil. Therefore, it is no surprise that a lot of our music reflects that heavy African influence. Now, I say that he is correct to an extent because while there is that African presence in our cultures and music, there is also that European presence and influence in our music and dance as well. If you look at just Dominican music, for example, the most evident presence of African influence in our music is most notably in the drums and the percussion. But if you look at some of the other instruments used in our music, such as the guitar and the accordion, which are very heavily used in Dominican music, that points to the European contribution. So it's a mesh of both. But there are certain genres of Latin American music, or let me just say again, Caribbean, that are strictly African, such as the Balo music from DR, Bomba from Puerto Rico. There's, I don't know how many African or Afro-Cuban music styles, from Cuba. I don't even know all of them off the top of my head. There's so many. And I mean, there are other countries as well that do have certain types of musical styles that are purely African. So of course there are those as well. But again, our music is not just African, so I feel like him saying that the music is African, it was a generalization. Now, the second point, which is what really mostly everyone was talking about, was him saying Latinos are black. Now, I get where he was going with that, and maybe by black he just meant African descent. I'm not sure, but he made a very broad blanketed statement by saying Latinos are black, because when you look at Latinos / Hispanics as a whole, and you look at Caribbean Hispanics along with Central and South American Hispanics, we are by no means the same at all. Our genetic components and the amount of African versus European versus Native American ancestry varies greatly depending on the region of Latin America you're looking at. Now, if you're looking at the Caribbean Latin American countries, then of course it is expected that there is going to be a higher African component in our country's respective gene pools. Now, if you look at Central and South America, it's not as expected that you're going to see a very high African component there, except for specific communities or countries such as maybe Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, certain parts of Honduras, where there are actually black populations there. But for the most part, what you can expect to see in those regions is a higher Native American and European, ancestry, so more mestizo populations, whereas in the Caribbean, you can expect to see more mulatto populations, which are mixed African and European. And of course, there's a little bit of, Native American in there, minimal amounts. So to say Latinos are black was an overgeneralization. So that is why I cannot blame some Hispanics for being like, well, we're not black. For example, one of my best friends is from El Salvador. She did her ancestry DNA test, and her results came back only 3% African. So to me, that is pretty much what you would expect to see for somebody from that country, from El Salvador, where the majority of the population is very much Native American and European, versus the 52% of African DNA in my ancestry results, which would be, that's what you would expect to see in somebody that is Dominican, because Dominican overall does have a higher African component in its gene pool. So again, you can't generalize and say that Latinos are black. Now, there are Latinos that are black though. And, as far as Hispanics actually identifying as black, I guess that's really subjective. I mean, at the end of the day, most Latin American countries, there were many racial skin color classifications It was not the two-tone society that the United States has historically always been, where you're either black or you're white, and most likely if there's any type of mixture, you're black. That wasn't the case in Latin America. There were many different levels. So even a mixed black person may not necessarily identify as black, or people that do identify as black, it might be just more based on their skin color. So it varies. So, you know, when you see a Latin American person saying that I'm not black, I'm mixed or whatever, that doesn't necessarily always mean that they're denying their African ancestry. It's just saying that they're also recognizing the other non-black ancestry that they have. But of course, there are those that say, no, I'm black. They have no problem identifying and accepting and embracing their African roots. And I know a lot of people have this idea that like no Hispanics were claiming to be black, but that's simply not the case. Now, has identifying as black or embracing your African roots been the popular thing to do within Latin America? No, it hasn't. And let's just keep it real. This idea of embracing your blackness is a lot more new to a lot of people. That is something that has been brushed under the rug for a lot of Latin American communities and societies, and it just is what it is. No point in even trying to deny it. But as of late, there are more Hispanics that are embracing that side of them. But like I said, there have also been those that have always embraced it and have always said, I'm a black person. Now, he also mentioned Santeria, which is quite popular in Cuba. I know there are, some Puerto Ricans that practice it. It's not as big in DR. Now, DR has its own version of voodoo, which is called 21 Divisiones, something like that. But it's not something that is like very wildly popular. Most Dominicans are Catholic, as is the case with Puerto Rico and Cuba. But there are also significant populations that practice Santeria. And like Fat Joe said, that religion is straight up African. The roots of that religion comes from Yoruba, I'm not quite sure how to say that, religion, and yeah, so that is definitely African influenced. Now, his last point where he said that Latinos might identify with African or black culture more than black people, which by black people, I think he meant African Americans, I was like, not quite sure about that one. Because again, the idea of identifying as black or really celebrating your blackness has not always been the popular thing to do within Latin America. But I do think there are those that are really into, their African roots. They proudly showcase it. They have tapped into these more African spiritual religions, and they are very proudly black. They celebrate being black while they also celebrate being Latino. But as far as identifying with their blackness more than like black people here in America, I don't know about all that. Y'all can give me your opinions on that. But I will say this. I think that when you compare black communities or black cultures in Latin America versus African American culture here in the United States, I do think that the African influences in Latin American cultures and music is a lot more obvious than it is in African American culture. Like somehow a lot of those African traditions and like musical influences were able to remain and carry on in Latin American cultures, and that is something that I don't quite see in African American culture. For example, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, I may not know of any, but I can't really think of any African American genre of music where I can say, oh, that sounds African, like whether it's in the drums or like this just the style of the music. Like I can't really think of any off the top of my head unless there were some older genres of music maybe I don't know about where it did sound very African, but I don't really know of any where you can like really, really tell like this music is African. And of course, many of the enslaved populations all over the world, not just in the United States, they were barred from being able to, practice their music and play instruments or play drums and stuff like that. So that could be part of the reason why you don't hear it. But again, I do think is a lot more apparent and more evident in certain Latin American cultures versus African American culture. Now, does that necessarily mean that Latin Americans, we identify more with our African roots? Not necessarily. But yeah, so on that last point, I don't know. Y'all can give me your opinions on that. So, my final thought when it comes to this is like, are Latinos black? The simple answer is some are, some aren't. It's just like when people say, are Dominicans black? Some are, some aren't. Now, when talking about black people within Latin America, again, it depends a lot on which region you're looking at. But even when you look at these regions that are typically more African descent, like for example in the Caribbean, when you zoom in even more and look at the individuals within these countries, not all of them are black. And when I say black, to me, that's someone that is predominantly African descent. You look black, like that is a black person to me. Like in DR, for example, between 85 to 90% of the population has African ancestry. However, everybody has varying degrees of that African ancestry. So you have some that have, low amounts, like maybe 15-20%, and the rest of their genetic makeup is mainly European. So they look white, Spanish white, very fair skin. They have European features, the straight hair, all that. Even though they have that little bit of black, that little bits of black in them, I would not consider them black. Then you have those that are more in the middle, like me. I'm 52% African. My skin color is dark, but you can still see there's something else in here. Like I don't look straight up sub-Saharan African descent. And then there's some on the other end of the spectrum that do have very high African ancestry, and they look it. Now, those are the Dominicans that I would consider black. Now, do they have some non-African ancestry in there? They probably do. At the end of the day, most of these so-called black Dominicans still have a little bit of European ancestry, just like the so-called white Dominicans have a little bit of African ancestry. All the white ones are black behind the ear, as some Dominicans say. So, when it comes to racial classification, it's all, what's the word? Subjective. Like, it varies, it varies. And it's not always a matter of self-hate and not wanting to, accept it. At the end of the day, race from a social construct perspective, it varies across cultures. It's not so one drop-ish in other places the way it was here. But again, some Latinos are black, some aren't. End of story. So that was it for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below on this. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll check you guys in the next video. Bye.